Hello there. Suspicious Nights welcomes you to the second episode of The Red-Headed League by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Enjoy the journey with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Why indeed? You seem most fortunate in having an employee who comes under the full market price. It is not a common experience among employers in this age. I do not know that your assistant is not as remarkable as your advertisement. Oh, he has his own faults too, said Mr. Wilson. Never was such a fellow for photography, snapping away with a camera when he ought to be improving his mind and then diving down into the cellar like a rabbit into its hole to develop its pictures. That is his main fault, but on the whole, he's a good worker. There's no vice in him. He's still with you, I presume? Yes, sir. He and a girl of 14, who does a bit of simple cooking and keeps the place clean. That's all I have in the house, for I am a widower and never had any family. We live very quietly, sir, the three of us, and we keep a roof over our heads and pay our debts, if we do nothing more. The first thing that put us out was that advertisement. Spaulding, he came down into the office just this day, 8 weeks ago, with this paper in his hand, and he says, "I wish to the Lord, Mr. Wilson, that I was a red-headed man." "Why that?" I ask. "Why," says he, "here's another vacancy on the League of the Red-Headed Men. It's worth quite a little fortune to any man who gets it, and I understand that there are more vacancies than there are men, so that the trustees are at their wits' end what to do with the money. If my hair would change color, here's a little crib all ready for me to step into." "Why, what is it then?" I asked. "You see, Mr. Holmes, I am a very stay-at-home man, and as my business came to me instead of my having going to it, I was often weeks on end without putting my foot over the doormat, and this way I didn't know much about what was going outside, and I was always glad of a bit of news." "Have you never heard of the League of the Red-Headed Men?" he asked with his eyes open. "Never," I replied. "Why, I wonder at that, for you are eligible yourself for one of the vacancies," he replied. "And what are they worth?" I asked. "Oh, merely a couple of hundred a year, but the work is too slight and it need not interfere very much with one's other occupations." Well, you can easily think that made me prick up my ears, for the business has not been over good for some years, and an extra couple of hundred would have been very handy. "Tell me about it," said I. "Well," said he, showing me to the advertisement, "you can see for yourself that the League has a vacancy, and there is an address where you should apply for particulars. As far as I can make out, the League was founded by an American millionaire, Esquire Hopkins, who was very peculiar in his ways. He was himself red-headed, and he had a great sympathy for all the red-headed men. So when he died, it was found that he had left his enormous fortune in the hands of trustees, with instructions to apply the interest to the providing of easy berths to men whose hair was of that color. From all I hear, it is splendid pay, and very little to do." "But," said I, "there would be millions of red-headed men who would apply." "Not so many as you think," he answered. "You see, it is really confined to Londoners and to grown men. This American had started from London, and when he was young, he wanted to do the old town a good turn. Then, again, I've heard it is of no use your applying if your hair is light red or dark red or anything but real bright, blazing, fiery red. Now, if you cared to apply, Mr. Wilson, you would just walk in, but perhaps it would hardly be worth your while to put yourself out of the way for the sake of a few £100. Now, it is a fact, gentlemen, as you may see for yourselves, that my hair is of a very full and rich tint, so that it seemed to me that if there was to be any competition in the matter, I stood a good chance as any man I have ever met. Vincent Spaulding seemed to know so much about it that I thought he might prove useful, so I just ordered him to put up the shutters for the day and to come right away with me. He was very willing to have a holiday, so we shut the business up and started off for that address that was given in the advertisement. I never hope to see such a sight as that again, Mr. Holmes. From north, south, east and west, every man who had a shade of red in his hair had tramped into the city to answer the advertisement. Fleet Street was choked with red-headed folk, and Pope's Court looked like a coaster's orange barrel. I should not have thought there were so many in the whole country as were brought together by that single advertisement. Every shade of color there were: straw, lemon, orange, brick, Irish setter, liver, clay. But as Spaulding said, there were not many who had the real vivid flame-colored tint. When I saw how many were waiting, I would have given it up in despair, but Spaulding would not hear of it. How he did it, I could not imagine. How he pushed and pulled and butted until he got me to the crowd and right up to the steps which led to the office. There was a double stream upon the stair, some going up in hope and some coming back dejected. But we wedged in as well as we could and soon found ourselves in the office. "Your experience has been a most entertaining one," remarked Holmes as his client paused and refreshed his memory with a huge pinch of snuff. "Pray, continue your very interesting statement." The client continued. "There was nothing in the office but a couple of wooden chairs, a deal table, behind which sat a small man with a head that was even redder than mine. He said a few words to each candidate as he came up, and then he always managed to find some fault in them which would disqualify them. Getting a vacancy did not seem to be a very easy matter, after all. However, when our turn came, the little man was much more favorable to me than any of the others, and he closed the door as we entered so that he might have a private word with us. 'This is Mr. Jabez Wilson,' said my assistant, 'and he is willing to fill a vacancy in the league.' 'And he is admirably suited for it,' the other answered. 'He has every requirement I cannot recall when I have seen anything so fine.' He took a step backward, cocked his head on one side, and gazed at my hair until I felt quite bashful. Then suddenly he plunged forward, wrung my hand, and congratulated me warmly on my success. 'It would be injustice to hesitate,' said he. 'You will, however, I am sure, excuse me for taking an obvious precaution.' With that, he seized my hair in both of his hands and tugged until I yelled with the pain. 'There is water in your eyes,' said he, as he released me. 'I perceive that all is as it should be. But we have to be careful, for we have twice been deceived by wigs and by paint. I could tell you tales of cobbler's wax which would disgust you with human nature.' He stepped over the window and shouted through it at the top of his voice that the vacancy was filled. A groan of disappointment came up from below, and the folk all trooped away in different directions until there was not a red head to be seen except my own, and that of the manager. 'My name,' said he, 'is Mr. Duncan Ross, and I am myself one of the pensioners upon the fund left by our noble benefactor. Are you a married man, Mr. Wilson? Have you a family?' I answered that I had not. His face fell immediately. 'Dear me,' he said gravely, 'this is very serious indeed. I am sorry to hear you say that. The fund was, of course, for the propagation and spread of the redhead, as well as for their maintenance. It is exceedingly unfortunate that you should be a bachelor.' My face lengthened at this, Mr. Holmes, for I thought that I was not to have the vacancy, after all. But after thinking it over for a few minutes, he said that it would be all right. 'In the case of another,' said he, 'the objection might be fatal, but we must stretch a point in favor of a man with such a head as hair of yours. When shall you be able to enter upon new duties?' 'Well, it is a little awkward, for I have a business already,' said I. 'Oh, never mind about that, Mr. Wilson,' said Vincent Spaulding. 'I should be able to look after that for you.' 'What would be the hours?' I asked. 10 to 2, replied Mr. Duncan Ross. 'Now, a pawnbroker's business is mostly done of an evening, Mr. Holmes, especially Thursday and Friday evening, which is just before the payday. So it would suit me very well to earn a little in the mornings. Besides, I knew that my assistant was a good man, and that he would see to anything that turned up.' 'That would suit me very well,' said I. 'And the pay?' 'The pay is $4 a week,' replied Mr. Duncan Ross. 'And the work?' I asked. 'Is purely nominal. What do you call purely nominal? Well, you have to be in the office for at least in the building the whole time. If you leave, you forfeit your whole position forever. The will is very clear upon the point. You do not comply with the conditions if you budge from the office during that time. It's only 4 hours a day, and I should not think of leaving, said I. No excuse will avail, said Mr. Duncan Rose. Neither sickness, nor business, nor anything else. There you must stay, or you lose your billet. And the work is to copy out the Encyclopedia Britannica. There is a first volume of it in that press. You must find your own ink, pens and blotting paper. But we provide this table and chair. Will you be ready tomorrow? Asked Mr. Ross. Certainly, I answered. Then goodbye, Mr. Jabez Wilson, and let me congratulate you once more on the important position which you have been fortunate enough to gain. He bowed me out of the room, and I went home with my assistant. Hardly knowing what to say or do, I was so pleased at my own good fortune. Well, I thought over the matter all day, and by evening I was in low spirits again, for I had quite persuaded myself that the whole affair must be some great hoax or fraud, though what its objection might be I could not imagine. It seemed together past belief that anyone could make such a will, or that they would pay such a sum for doing anything so simple as copying out Encyclopedia Britannica. Vincent Spaulding did what he could to cheer me up, but by bedtime I had reasoned myself out of the whole thing. However, in the morning I determined to have a look at it anyhow, so I bought a penny bottle of ink, and with a quill pen and 7 sheets of foolscap paper, I started off for Pope's Court. Well, to my surprise and delight, everything was as right as possible. The table was set out ready for me, and Mr. Duncan Ross was there to see that I got fairly to work. He started me off upon a letter A, and then he left me, but he would drop in from time to time to see all was right with me. At 2 o'clock, he bade me good day, complimented me upon the amount that I had written, and locked the door for the office after me. This went on day after day, Mr. Holmes, and on Saturday the manager came in and planked down 4 golden sovereigns for my week's work. It was the same next week, and the same the week after. Every morning I was there at 10, and every afternoon I left at 2. By degrees, Mr. Duncan Ross took to coming in only once of a morning, and then after a time he did not come at all. Still, of course, I never dared to leave the room for an instant, for I was not sure that he might come, and the billet was such a good one, and suited me so well that I would not risk the loss of it. 8 weeks passed away like this, and I had written about abbots and archery and armor and architecture and Attica, and hoped with diligence that I might get on to bees before very long. It cost me something in foolscap, and I had pretty nearly filled a shelf with my writings. And then suddenly the whole business came to an end. To an end? Asked Holmes. Yes, sir. And no later than this morning, I went to my work at usual 10 o'clock, but the door was shut and locked with a little square of a cardboard hammered onto the middle of a panel with a tack. Here it is, you can read it for yourself. He held a piece of white cardboard about the size of a sheet of notepaper. It read in this fashion. The Red-Headed League is dissolved. October 9, 1890.